What if comfort isn't helping you feel better? It's just keeping you emotionally stuck. Is the comfort you're choosing actually restoring you or quietly reinforcing the same emotional pattern? If you're someone who's done the work, you've hit goals, stayed disciplined, pushed yourself, you already know effort isn't the hard part. The hard part is this: knowing when comfort is actually supporting your growth and when it's no longer supportive, but quietly training you to stay the same. That's what we're walking through today. The role of comfort in personal development, not as the villain, not as the goal, but as a tool, a signal, a pattern. Let's make this clear up front. Comfort isn't bad, but emotional training means you don't just look at what you do, you look at what state you're training. And comfort, if it's not conscious, becomes a habit. You feel resistance, you retreat. You feel intensity, you soothe. You feel uncertain, you distract. And maybe it starts with a night off, a bath, a snack. But if it becomes your default, you're not recovering, you're reinforcing. One person I worked with would take long weekends to decompress. They thought they were creating space for growth, but after months of this, they were still stuck. Why? Because those weekends weren't followed by new emotional training. They were a pause button on a loop. Their nervous system wasn't learning anything new. It was just sinking deeper into avoidance. Comfort isn't rest when it keeps you in the same emotional pattern. It's repetition, and repetition trains. Think about how you build muscle. If you only ever lifted weights that felt easy, your body would never need to adapt. It's the discomfort, that last challenging rep, that signals the body to grow. It's the same with your emotional state. If you only operate inside what feels comfortable, you're not training change, you're maintaining the current pattern. Discomfort isn't the problem, it's the stimulus that allows something new to be built. Comfort feels like a warm blanket, but it's often covering something deeper. And that's where most people get stuck. They think, I'm relaxing, I'm just being gentle with myself, I'm taking the pressure off. But if you pause in that moment and look underneath, there's often something else present: uncertainty, shame, powerlessness, frustration, and that glass of wine or that extra hour on the couch. It's not wrong, but it becomes a problem if it's your go-to response to every uncomfortable state. Because then your nervous system isn't learning how to redirect, it's learning how to escape. One client told me, I need downtime before I can focus, but that downtime always came after conflict, disappointment, or failure. And instead of practicing power or clarity, they were training disengagement. Comfort is neutral, but if you always reach for it when discomfort shows up, you're reinforcing the very state you say you want to shift. Let's talk about the phrase we all hear: you deserve it. You've worked hard. You've shown up. You've been productive. So go ahead, relax. You've earned it. Here's what most people don't realize: that feeling of deserving comfort, it often shows up right after emotional intensity, when you've been stretched, challenged, or exposed. And instead of using that window to train something new like presence, stability, or certainty, we soothe it. We buffer. Again, this doesn't mean don't rest. It means pay attention to what you're reinforcing. Someone I worked with was deeply committed to grow. They did the reading, the courses, even the journaling, but every time emotional intensity showed up, even slight friction with a partner or an underwhelming result, they gave themselves grace by pulling back, skipping the inner work, and recharging. Which sounds kind, but 6 months later, nothing had changed because they weren't training alignment. They were training avoidance, dressed up as self-care. There's a difference between comfort that supports your training and comfort that resets you back into a familiar, limiting pattern. Let's look at it another way. The goal isn't to eliminate comfort, it's to redefine it. Because the problem isn't that comfort exists, it's that most people rest in emotional states they never chose. disconnection, overthinking, low-grade frustration, a kind of whatever that slowly becomes their baseline. But what if comfort didn't mean escaping? What if it meant returning to clarity, certainty, calm? That doesn't happen by accident. It happens through repetition, through training. One client worked hard to build the state of grounded confidence. At first, it felt foreign, almost fake. But over time, with redirection and repetition, it became where they returned when things got hard. That was comfort. But it was comfort that reflected who they were becoming. Comfort is powerful as long as it reflects the emotional state you're consciously training. If this is landing, hit subscribe. I share weekly videos to help you train your inner world with structure, clarity, and emotional precision. Here's something subtle but critical. The more you train a disempowering pattern, the more your system will resist change. Why? Because it feels like a threat. Even if it's good for you, I've worked with people training emotional presence. They'll have a breakthrough, clarity, openness, power, and then the very next day they crash. Why? Because the nervous system goes, that's unfamiliar. Let's go back to normal. And normal meant disconnection or control or withdrawal, even chaos. So the moment progress shows up, the comfort pattern pulls them back, not because they failed, but because their body is trained to what's been repeated. If you don't make comfort conscious, it will quietly train you to stay the same, even while you're trying to grow. Real development doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in choice. You choose the emotional state. You choose the repetition. You choose to stay in discomfort long enough for your system to learn something new. And eventually, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. Certainty becomes the default. Presence becomes the resting state. Connection becomes what your body returns to when things get hard. That's the earned comfort, not because you numbed, but because you trained. The path isn't about rejecting comfort. It's about becoming the kind of person whose comfort reflects emotional alignment. If you're hearing this and thinking, this sounds like me, you're not off track, you're not behind, you've just been training a pattern that no longer reflects who you're becoming, and that can change. When you reach for comfort, what emotional state are you actually reinforcing underneath? And is that the state you want to rest in tomorrow? If you're ready to stop managing symptoms and start training a steady, resilient inner state, I've built a system for that. It integrates perception, emotion, and nervous system. So you don't just understand your patterns, you actually shift them. The link's below. I also share weekly practices on Instagram at Mike Wang Coaching. And if you want more depth, you can join the newsletter below. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next video.